Hey, everybody, it's Pastor Ty. Hope you're having a great Monday. Hope your week is off to a fantastic start. We're going to review yesterday's sermon on Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 56. This was Jesus's walking on the water with the disciples and the corresponding events that happen after they get off the boat and get back on dry land. I'm going to break down yesterday's passage into the three sections I used in the sermon. Ascent, descent, and margins. Those were the three sections we used to sort of categorize the passage. I'll begin with verses 45 through 46, ascent. And my main point in yesterday's message was that just like Moses and Elijah prior to him, we find Jesus ascending to the top of the mountain after a miraculous, sobering, and alarming event occurred, right? So for Moses, he ascends Mount Sinai after the parting of the sea and this great and stupendous Exodus moment, right? And so we have Moses up on the mountain after his moment. And for Elijah, he ascends the mountaintop after his successful showdown with the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel that caused King Ahab and Jezebel to be so upset. And so Jesus is taking a page out of the Old Testament, and he's doing the same thing that we see Moses and Elijah having done prior. And that's really important because Jesus is showing us, he's given us a really great example of what we ought to do when we encounter any form of success. Because as I'm sure many of us know, sometimes the most dangerous time in your life or in your ministry is right after you get a whiff of success, right? We are, as humans, we are stupendous beings at self-sabotage, especially after success. And so it's really interesting that Jesus dismisses the crowd, dismisses the disciples, and ascends to the top of the mountain to experience intimacy with the Father. But what's perhaps most important is what happens immediately after this. So Jesus ascends to the top of the mountain. The disciples are out on the Sea of Galilee, and they're making what Mark tells us is painful headway because of a headwind. And so they're rowing hard, they're striving, and they're not getting anywhere, or not getting anywhere very fast. And we're told that Jesus comes down from the mountain and walks on the water and intends to pass by the disciples. So first of all, I realized in yesterday's message that the lead gets buried so easily in this that we forget that Jesus is walking on water, which is just truly miraculous. One of the things I joked about yesterday is, what could Jesus possibly do that is more stupendous than feeding 5,000 people with 5 barley loaves and a couple fish? What could possibly be greater than that? Well, here he is doing that thing. But what's most important is Jesus in this moment is like doing the Uno reverse card, and he is pivoting from one role to the next. It's kind of like Jesus being the ultimate mediator. So in one sense, he's like Moses and Elijah ascending the mountain. But in another sense, he's just like Yahweh in what he does next. Because look what we find in the text today. We're told that Jesus intended to pass by the disciples. Now, if you're just reading that in American English, you would assume he's like trying to tiptoe past the disciples. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, because we're told that Jesus saw them out on the water and intended to go to them. And so he obviously wants to be seen. So the question is, what's going on here? The clue is in Jesus's ascent onto the mountain, because like Moses and Elijah ascended the mountain, something happened to those two men when they were atop the mountain. We're told in both instances, in Exodus chapter 33 and in 1 Kings chapter 19, in both instances, God's goodness, God's glory passes before these men. In Moses' case at Mount Sinai, God actually says, I'm going to cover you as I pass by you, right? And the same exact thing happens with Elijah. When Elijah realizes that God's glory is going to pass by him, he wraps his cloak around his face to protect himself, because God's glory is so absolute that we can't see it and live. But in both cases, these glory pass by them. So when Jesus intends to pass by the disciples, the intent is to show them his glory. But the problem in the text is that the disciples are striving. They're striving so hard in Jesus' name, mind you, that they miss a ministry opportunity from Jesus himself. And that's really important, because we're told in the text today that they miss Jesus's passing by them. They missed the glory. They missed the ministry opportunity. They missed the miracle because they didn't understand the loaves from the miracle prior. And so the big kind of application takeaway I gave my congregation yesterday was, if you ignore or fail to discern one miracle, you're more prone to miss the next one. And that's really important for us to hear, because if you miss one miracle, if you miss one opportunity at being ministered to by God, if you miss one moment where God intends to do something stupendous for you, you're going to miss the next one, and you're going to miss the next one. How often do we miss something that God intends to be a ministerial moment for us that instead we're simply terrified or confused by? I think it happens a lot. The other thing I would make note of is, last week we talked about how Jesus's miraculous feeding of the 5,000 is the constitution of the new Israel. You have Israel en masse represented by the people on the hillside. You have the 12 disciples passing out the elements, in a way operating like the 12 tribes head leaders. And then you have Jesus operating like Yahweh, providing abundance in the wilderness, new manna, we called it. Well, I mentioned at the end of last week's sermon that if you are out in the wilderness and abundance is being provided for you in the wilderness, tests are coming. Well, that's exactly what today was. Today was a wilderness test for new Israel. And how did the disciples do? Not well. In fact, what we would say is that their striving deters their faith, right? That they're so hard at the oar. They're so hard at working on behalf of Jesus. They miss Jesus. They miss his ministry to them. And that's really important. And it would be really unfortunate if yesterday we had stopped there. I think it's really important that Mark 6 has 4 more verses, that we have verses 53 through 56 that we categorized yesterday as margins. And the margins matter because the people on the margins are who Jesus ultimately blesses the most. And we have this incredible dichotomy between the disciples on the water striving hard at the oar and these people who are sick and infirmed, who can't move, who can't